back to the first one, which is to say the work is probably not my job. It's not what I'm doing in the secular world. I think that the work is the study of Torah. And then the employer who is mentioned is really not my boss in the office next to me. It is Hashem, it is God, it is the master with a capital M. And so put that way, there's not a lot of time to study Torah. The work is great. I'm probably inclined to postpone it, to not do enough. But I'm reminded of two things. The reward is great, and it will come not in this life, but in the world to come. And God is pressing me to get going. God is saying, by being a Jew, you are thrown into this. You don't start from square one so much. You start in the middle. So you don't have to finish this, but you cannot divorce yourself from this amazing, wonderful task. And Roger, if you learn it, you will be rewarded, and God will pay you the reward. You just have to wait to the world to come.
Roger, that was just so beautifully said. Does anybody want to respond to what Roger said? I love everything.
Don't ask me to repeat it.
Wow, I'm so glad you're recording this. That was.
You know, I'd forgotten, and I heard Roger start talking because Roger was brilliant when we did our last Pirkey Avot class, and I'm like, oh, I got to record. Okay, so here's what I want to say. Very often you see this as just the first two lines. And people really talk about it as this is our work. And I've seen it, the reason I've seen it a lot during COVID is I've seen it in terms of the Jewish community, okay? Jewish communal professionals, Jewish teachers, any of us, there's not enough time, there's too much work, it's overwhelming. And when we get overwhelmed, we need to remember that we don't have to finish it. We don't have to do everything, but just because we can't do everything doesn't mean we shouldn't start, right? Well, the longest journey begins with the first steps, right? Or however that goes. So you can't say, oh, it's too much, I'm overwhelmed, I'm not going to start. If there's a big task, you just start one step at a time. I just read something the other day that somebody's grandmother used to tell them, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, which I thought was very cute. So that's how you usually see it. And like this reminder during COVID, we shouldn't get too overwhelmed. We should take things one step at a time. But these last second two verses, which are often not included, show us that it's not just about our regular work. It's about Torah. It's about Torah study. It's about our Jewish ritual life. And again, the day is short. We have so much work to do. It'd be easy to say, I'm not going to study Torah. I don't have time. I don't have time for doing Jewish things. I'm too busy with my work. And as Roger said, the Rabbi Tarfon is telling us, no, you can't just say, I'm not going to do it because it's too hard. You start wherever you are and continue on. And the rewards, we should trust in God to reward us. And the reward might not be coming now. It might be coming in the world to come, which is another word for the afterlife and whatever comes after we die. So Roger, you nailed it. I just think it's great. Does anybody have any other comments about this? Because I think it's just a great text. Yeah, Sherry, go ahead.
I think the second piece is that second paragraph or sentence, whatever you want to say, is so often used, or very similar words are used to talk about tikkun olam, that you should be trying to repair the world. You can't finish the task perhaps, but you are not free to just say, it's not my problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, it could also even apply to COVID and COVID restrictions, right? Somebody could just give up and say, oh, there's no way we can keep this from spreading across the world. Why are we bothering with all the restrictions? Well, just because we're not going to be able to keep it from spreading at all doesn't mean we don't have to do our own part, you know, masks and social distancing and washing our hands or whatever. All right. So we've got a commentary on this one. Somebody like to read this from Rambam, from Maimonides?
I can read it.
Great.
Rambam, life is short, there's much wisdom to acquire, and people are apathetic, despite the great rewards and the Torah's numerous exhortations to pursue wisdom and knowledge.
So what does that mean to you?
There's a lot to do.
There's a lot to do.
There's a lot to do, and despite the reward being so large, to me it seems like what it's saying is that because life is short and there is so much to learn, that maybe the reward is not in the amount you learn of all the different areas, but just the part about just pursuing the wisdom and the knowledge at whatever level is the great reward.
So it's a process, not just the product. Is that what you're saying?
The process, not the product.
True.
Or the quantity. The quality, not the quantity.
Yep. There's another place in Pirkey Avot that says, we might have done it last time, that you should set a fixed time for Torah study, because if you say, when I have leisure, I'll study, you might not ever study. Right? It's sort of like exercise or anything else that's really important to you. You've got to set a time for it. Anything else about this one before we go on?
I think it tells you that you should never be satisfied.
Always strive for more. My Rabbi Shmaya Shmatkin used to say that to look at your life as you're always on an incline. There's no staying still in terms of your growth Jewishly, in terms of your learning, in terms of being a better person. The minute that you stop, you're sliding backwards. You always have to keep moving forward and growing. Thank you, Erin. All right, next one. Who would like to read? The challenging one.
Everything is foreseen, yet freedom of choice is given. The world is judged with goodness. Everything is according to the preponderance of good deeds.
All right. So I put these as 3 bullets because they really seem like different ideas, but they are all one verse. But let's take them one piece at a time. Everything is foreseen, yet freedom of choice is given. So this is different, dealing with the idea of free will and predestination, right? Everything is foreseen. God knows exactly what's going to happen, but we also have free choice. How do those go together? It's a hard one. So sometimes I explain this as, I think I may have given this metaphor last time. If you think of everything that's going to happen in the world as a book that's already been written, but the characters who are in the book don't know the book's been written, and they're still going to make choices and do what they're going to do. The author already knows what they're going to do, but to them, they still have free will to make that decision in that place and time. All right, the world is judged with goodness. What does that mean to you?
Always have a positive outlook. Think of the best in people. Don't look for negative. Always, so when you look for negative, you'll find negative. But if you're looking for the good, you're going to find good in people and things around you. So
for you, it's saying what we judge the world, we should judge them in the positive. Good. Sherry?
I was going to say that I see the first 2 together in a way, because I see, well, they're all, but I see that God is hoping that we will make good choices.
Great. I like that. And then everything is according to the preponderance of good deeds. What do you think that means? So there's a section of Sanhedrin, Mishnah Sanhedrin, that says that at any given moment, a person should see themselves like a scale, like a balance, as equally good and equally bad. So that anything they do, any action they take, is going to either weigh them down for being good or for being bad, which means every single action they take is very important. And then it goes on to say, and the whole world should also always think of itself as equally balanced between good and evil. So any individual action I take, it not only weighs myself in terms of how God judges me for good and evil, but weighs the entire world. Okay, but so this sort of reminds me of that, but it says that everything's that is focused according to the good deeds. So this is a very optimistic section of Pirkei Avot.
It is. It's also, I think it shows to me how revolutionary Judaism was in the ancient world, if not today. In the ancient world, we know that there were other belief systems in which the gods were indifferent to the fate of humanity. Human beings were almost playthings to them in Mesopotamia, in Greece, and in Rome. Yet here is a God who is saying, everything is foreseen. I've given you freedom of choice. And then in the book of Deuteronomy, we're told, and choose life. I, God, want you to become a partner with me. I, God, want you to succeed. And that's extraordinary. I mean, that offers us so much hope through our own work, that everything is foreseen. We are not doomed. It is not hopeless. It is just the opposite.
And that God cares about us and wants good for us. You're right. It's a very hopeful way to look at the world. All right. So here are 3 commentaries on this because there's so much here. Aviva, you want to read us what Rambam has to say?
Everything that goes on in the world is foreseen by God, yet this knowledge does not remove man's freedom to choose.
That's sort of like the book I was talking about before, right? It's God already knows what's going to happen, but it doesn't keep us from having free choice. All right. And then Mandy, you want to read to us what Maharal says about that?
Although God foresees that a person is about to act foolishly, he does not interfere and choice is given.
So that makes me think of parenting, right? It would be so nice if we could step in and stop our children every time they're about to make a mistake, right? We don't want our kids to get hurt. We don't want them to do anything wrong. But if we don't let them make choices and make mistakes, they're never going to learn to be independent, right? So God is standing back and letting us make mistakes so that we learn and improve and become better. Karen, you want to read us this one from Rabbi Schneerson?
Every individual's capacity in qualities are known to God, and he is not present a person, and he does not present. He does not present a person with challenges that he cannot overcome. It is therefore obvious that every person was given the strength to fulfill the mandate given to him.
What do you think of that? This is a controversial thing to say. First of all, what do you think it means? Have you ever heard somebody say, God doesn't give us anything we can't handle? It's a controversial thing to say, right? Because if you're in the midst of really difficult circumstance, I'm not sure you want to hear that, right? If you're sick or something bad has happened to you and, oh yeah, but God wouldn't have given you that challenge if you couldn't handle it. I think it's one of these things that you never want to say to somebody else when they're going through a hard time, right? Somebody just found out their God forbid, their child is sick. You don't want to say, oh, but God knew you could handle this, so that's why God gave you that challenge. That is not going to be helpful to them. But maybe if we're looking at our own life, right? When something bad has happened to me personally, and I'm like, why me? Why is this happening to me? Maybe if I think God knows I can handle this, maybe it would give me strength. So maybe it's something I can look at internally for me, but don't ever say it to anybody else. That's my opinion. I don't think you ever want to try and rationalize the difficulty somebody's facing.
Tippy.
Yeah.
This brings up one thing that my dad would always say to me growing up, or say to us growing up. So I'm the middle of 7 children, and we would pick on each other, right? And then we'd be like, Dad, so-and-so's picking on me, so-and-so, things like this. Or like if it happened on the school bus, happened on, wherever at school, anything like bullying, things like that. And my dad would say, do you know what? Lucky they're doing it to you because you can handle it. If they were doing it to the kid next to you or, something, they wouldn't be able to deal with it. And he was like, look at how much you guys pick on me, because we picked on my dad all the time, you know? And he's like, and I can handle it and I'm fine with it, you know? So it was kind of like, lucky they're doing it to you and not the person who can't handle it.
Yeah. I said similar things to my youngest when COVID hit, and he had a lot of, I mean, it was just it's been a tough year for everyone, but within a very short period of time, his grandmother died. He had a trip to Israel canceled. His bar mitzvah got canceled. A second trip to Israel got canceled. I mean, like, it was a lot within a few short months. And I did say to him, if it had to be one of the 3 kids in the family, you are handling this the best that any of them would. Like, you are such an easygoing kid. Like, you are just going with it and you're dealing with it and you're not feeling sorry for yourself. Like, I said, I hate it that it all happened, right? It's not that it's good, but like, you're handling it well. So I guess you need to know the person you're saying it to, but it's an interesting way to think about things. All right, let's try this one. Aaron, you want to read this one?
Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Azariah, would say, if there is no Torah, there is no common decency. If there is no common decency, there is no Torah. If there is no wisdom, there is no fear of God. If there is no fear of God, there is no wisdom. If there is no applied knowledge, there is no analytical knowledge. If there is no analytical knowledge, there is no applied knowledge. If there is no flour, there is no Torah. If there is no Torah, there is no flour. Im ein kema ein Torah, im ein Torah ein kema.
I put some of the Hebrew ones in here that are very famous. It's interesting to me about Pirkei Avot that there are many verses that are very famous, but are not quoted in their entirety. So this is another one. The beginning of it, if there's no Torah, there's no common decency. And the Hebrew in there is derech eretz. So if anybody knows that phrase, derech eretz is like treating people with respect. There's no Torah, there's no common derech eretz. If there's no derech eretz, there's no Torah. That's quoted a lot. And this end, if there's no flour, there's no Torah. If there's no Torah, there's no flour. Those are both quoted a lot. You don't hear the middle parts so much. But let's start at the beginning. What do you think it means that if there's no Torah, there's no common decency, and if there's no common decency, there's no Torah?
Torah that's where all of our laws are. So if there's no laws, you're not going to follow them. People are going to be hurt in various ways. There's going to be no structure. There's no common decency. So you need one to have the other.
Right. But if we're not being decent to each other, then we haven't really internalized the Torah, right? Okay. If there's no wisdom, there's no fear of God. If there's no fear of God, there's no wisdom. How are those two connected?
It's not smart to not fear God. I mean, the idea of, that God, you say everything happens for a reason. Well, then, God is giving you those, with respect to what we just talked about, God's giving you what you can handle. It's not smart not to fear what God's going to hand you next.
So having that wisdom of understanding God and God's power in our lives, all right? If there's no applied knowledge, there's no analytical knowledge. If there's no analytical knowledge, there's no applied knowledge. What do you think of that? I think that would be an interesting science one. Yeah, Sherry, what do you think? You're muted. You're muted.
I think it's getting at the idea that you have to walk the walk, not just talk. And so you can analyze things, but if you don't apply them and do the right thing, then what's the sense of your taking the time to analyze?
Excellent.
Yeah, and also,
go ahead.
If you haven't learned anything, you don't have anything to analyze. So I think real basic.
Yep.
You have to have a little foreknowledge of experience to be able to analyze a situation.
Great. If there's no flour, there's no Torah. If there's no Torah, there's no flour. Flour here is a metaphor for food, right? If you don't have food, you don't have Torah. If you don't have Torah, you don't have food. What do you think that means?
I don't know. I'm thinking very basic. If you don't have anything to eat, you wouldn't be alive. So you would have nothing to study, but also no energy to use your mind if you were alive and you had no food. So those are important to go together.
What about the reverse? If there's no Torah, there's no flour. There's no, sometimes the flour is translated as sustenance. There's no Torah, there's no sustenance. Yeah, sure.
I think you have to have a purpose to live. And in this case, they're getting at the idea of doing good is a purpose. So if you don't have a purpose, then what's the sense of continuing on this earth?
Excellent. Sort of like the expression, a man cannot live on bread alone, right? Isn't that a saying? Yeah. All right. So here are a couple of commentaries on this one. Roger, you want to read the one from Rishimot?
If one's commitment to one's fellow is not based on a divine imperative, it ultimately fails.
So I think that this is going back to the one, if there's no fear of God, there's no wisdom, right? So if the reason that we are doing well to each other doesn't have anything to do with God, it's going to ultimately fail, right? If your religion is just being nice to other people because you feel it's the right thing to do, then at some point, if it doesn't suit you, it might go out the window, right? If you feel that there's a divine imperative, however you understand divine, but there's some kind of moral imperative here about how you treat other people, then even if it's not convenient for you, then you're still going to stick to it.
Who was Reshimot?
I honestly don't know. I have to spend more time looking at some of these commentators. I will look it up for you, Roger. Aviva, you want to read us Rabbi Yonah?
Or cannot be truly absorbed within a person who lacks good character. One must first have the we will do before the we will hear.
Mm.
So what do you think that means?
Wow.
Well, it's from saying, Nasa Vinishma, what we all said at Mount Sinai, is that, before, we will do, then we listen. So it's the idea that, you have to do something. It's not always about fully understanding the why of your doing. It's just knowing that it's something that you should be doing. I feel like that's kind of what it's talking about is, that's what makes a person who they are, is when they jump in with 2 feet to go help, there's, some kind of fundraiser for whatever cause is going on, and you jump in with 2 feet. And then you can, you realize this is what you're supposed to do to help other people. And then maybe afterwards you can, read a little bit more about it and spread the word to other people. But by you jumping in first, that defines who you are.
The action comes first, right? The action, and then the learning comes after that.
Sippy and others, yeah. I quickly grabbed my phone. Reshimot is not a who, it's a what.
Okay.
Editor's notebook, editor's note, Reshimot, 3 notebooks of notes by the Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, came to light about a month after his passing, when they were discovered in a drawer in his room. The entries in these journals date between the years 1928, the year of the Rebbe's marriage, and 1950. Throughout these, the Rebbe kept these notebooks with him at all times, jotting down the scholarly and sublime products of his phenomenal mind, also in the most precarious of circumstances.
Excellent. Thank you, Roger. Thank you. Terrific. All right, let's keep going because there's so much good stuff here. This is a really famous one, and this one, usually the whole thing is quoted, I think. Brittany, you want to read this one?
Sure thing. Ben Zoma would say, who is wise? One who learns from every man. Who is strong? One who overpowers his inclinations. Who is rich? One who is happy with his lot. And who is honorable? One man who honors his fellows.
I have lots of favorites in Pirkey Avot, but this is definitely one of them because I love this. Let's take them apart. Why is a person who learns from everyone wise?
you're not picking and choosing. You're saying, you know, everyone has something important to give, whether you have a lot of money or you're the poorest person around, whether you've had lots of, you know, large education or you've only been in school for 5 years. You know, everyone has something important to give. You have to be willing to listen to it all.
You can learn from everyone who's put in your path, everyone who's put in front of you. I've had an ongoing conversation with a member of our community about whether adults can learn from children, right? Some of the Chavruta learning that she's heard about in our community, and kids are supposed to be teaching adults, and she keeps saying, I don't get that. Adults can't learn from children. Children have to learn from adults. And I keep saying, you can learn a lot from children, and she just doesn't see it. I think I just need to put her in a position at some point where she's going to learn from a child, and she'll get it.
My 4-year-olds teach me something new every day.
For sure, right? Teachers learn, I think, way more from their students than their students learn from the teachers, for sure. For sure.
Yes.
All right, how is overpowering your inclinations make you strong?
Resisting the temptation to sin.
Which is really hard, right? It's a different kind of strength than being able to lift 400 pounds, but it's a tremendous strength, right? And I also love that it's starting with your own stuff, right? I'm not strong because I can win an argument against you. I'm strong because I can conquer my own issues. Great. All right. To be rich is to be happy with your lot. What do you think of that one? Yeah, Marie?
Huh?
You want to say something?
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking if you are happy with your lot, you are rich, because I think that might be one of the most difficult things that humans have to deal with. And I think we always try to fill that feeling of unhappiness with, oh, well, if only I had more money, or if I had more material wealth, or if I had better friends, more whatever. And a lot of times people will acquire those things and still be unhappy. So
you can't buy happiness, right?
Right.
You need a certain amount, I think, of economic stability. Right, bottom line, you need to have food to eat and a place to live and clothes to wear and like some kind of security in order to, bottom line. But after that baseline, I don't know that more money makes you more happy, right? It's not about that. More money is not necessarily going to make you happy. And being happy with what you have is so. And this last one, who is honorable, one who honors others. What do you think of that?
Can't have honor without recognizing what other people have and being respectful of those other people. You know, the idea that every person has value. If you can't understand that fact, how could you ever consider yourself to be an honorable person?
Yeah, I think Aviva really nailed it. And so much of this is about humility, empathy, and as we're learning in our 3-week class, an appreciation of the diversity of others, while at the same time remembering B'Tselem Elohim, everyone is created in the image of God.
So isn't it amazing to think that this was written like 1,500 years ago? Like so long ago, this wisdom was already out there. That's why even Pirkey Avot literally means the chapters of the fathers, but is often called the ethics of the fathers because it's just such great ethical lessons. All right, let's take a look at the commentary. This is from a commentary called Shir Shirim Rabbah. Lisa, you want to read this one?
The Torah is compared to water, just as water flows drop by drop until it becomes a stream. So it is with Torah. One studies 2 laws today, 2 laws tomorrow, until it becomes a flowing stream.
So Torah and other wisdom builds upon each other, right? The more you learn, the more you know, and that more you want to learn. And yeah, I love that. And Yelkut Shimoni is another commentary. Kate, do you want to read that?
Yep. A king once asked his servant to hire workers to fill in an infinitely deep pit. When the foolish workers looked into the pit and said, when will I fill it? The wise worker said, I am a day worker. I'm happy to have found work.
So what's the difference between the servant and the day workers? No, sorry. What is the difference between the foolish worker that's complaining and the wise worker?
The wise worker recognizes the fact that they now have a job, that they have a way to support family themselves, and you should be grateful with what you're given. Whereas the foolish worker only thinks about, you know, the end result, not what's happening right then.
Great.
Yeah, the foolish workers thought that they were required to finish the task. As Rabbi Tarfon pointed out, no. They also said, when will I fill it? They weren't thinking, let's work together. And so if each of them had said, I'm a day worker, which means I don't have to work endlessly. I'm happy to have found this task. Now let all of us work together.
And that working together is more important now than ever. At least in the Jewish world I'm working in, I'm seeing more cooperation between organizations, between professionals than I've ever seen anywhere. I don't know if it's outside the Jewish world is the same thing, because I'm very isolated in my work, but the way I see different schools working together, different communities working together, everybody helping each other in a way that never was before. Because the tasks in front of us are so enormous and nobody can do it by themselves. And so people are coming together, which is really, it's one of those things I hope will continue after COVID. Okay, another very, very famous one. There's a song about this one you might recognize. Jennifer, do you want to read this one? Can you read?
Me, Jennifer?
Yep.
Oh, I just started singing. I hope you didn't hear that.
Then good, you definitely should do it.
Mitzvah, Gorera, mitzvah. Run to pursue a minor mitzvah and flee from a transgression. For a mitzvah brings another mitzvah, and a transgression brings another transgression. For the reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah, and the reward of a transgression is transgression.
So this is another one where we usually quote just the middle verse. Mitzvah goreret mitzvah, avera goreret mitzvah, which is the song Jennifer was singing, which is one mitzvah leads to another mitzvah and one sin leads to another sin, or one transgression leads to another sin. But it leaves out the first part, okay? You should run to do a minor mitzvah, not just a major one, but a minor one, and you should flee from a transgression. What does that mean to you?
Really a minor or a major, you can't really pair that. You know, it might be minor to one person and not minor to another. Helping someone cross the street, whoever they are, can be looked at as minor or major depending on who's looking at it. You know, me helping someone might be minor to me, but the person being helped, it's a major one for them. Putting on a talit, you know, some people might consider that a minor thing, some people might consider that a major one. So I don't exactly agree with the minor, but I feel like, you know, every mitzvah you should go and try to do it no matter how you look at it.
So I'm reading this fascinating, I'm studying, not reading, studying a really fascinating book with my weekly Chaverta partner that looks at the afterlife, what happens in Judaism after you die. And the section we're reading right now talks about the Jewish view of reincarnation. And it talks about that a soul is reincarnated if it hasn't finished perfecting itself. So like if there's one area that it just hasn't gotten right yet, the soul will come back to try and fix it. So, you know, if somebody is wonderful with giving tzedakah, but not good about studying, or great about studying, but not good at visiting their sick neighbor, they'll come back again to have a chance to do it. And that sometimes if you are drawn to a specific mitzvah, that it's because that's what your soul is here to fulfill, which I thought was really interesting. But this also has the idea of running to do a mitzvah and fleeing from a transgression, right? There are a bunch of places in the Torah where it talks about running to do a mitzvah, like Abraham getting up early in the morning. Sherry, go ahead.
I was going to say the fleeing from a transgression to me can mean so much more, because a lot depends on who you associate with. And so if you are with people that are not doing the right thing, you should flee from them because they're a bad influence on you.
For sure. For sure. Yeah, Karen.
I was thinking mitzvahs or good deeds like build on each other.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go towards them and start doing one, it may create another, it may create another, it may create another. And then the opposite for transgressions, like let's say you do something wrong, you're like, I can do that again, you know, and it just like leads to more sins.
Yep, absolutely. I love this last part. The reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah, and it's weird that they use the word reward. Hold on, and the reward of a transgression is a transgression. So an interesting way of putting it. But this idea that the reward of a mitzvah is another mitzvah. There's a concept in Judaism that we shouldn't do a mitzvah. We shouldn't follow a commandment in order to get whatever that reward is in the world to come that we were talking about earlier. That we should do it because the reward is actually the mitzvah itself. Because the word mitzvah also comes from the word that means connection. And that when we do a mitzvah, we're making a connection. However you want to understand that. We're making a connection with God. We're making a connection with another person that we're helping. But we're creating that connection. So the reward for doing that mitzvah is the connection you're creating. And the consequence of the transgression is the separation. So I really like that way of looking at things.
I like that too.
Okay, Aaron, you want to read us what Rambam says about this?
Ben Azai speaks not only of physical running, which is appropriate for many mitzvot, but of an emotional yearning and joy in the fulfillment of a mitzvah, even a minor one. This pleasure and job stems from an awareness that a mitzvah, even a minor one, connects us with the infinite one.
I gave away the punchline before it came. I apologize, but I love this, that it's not just the running to do it quickly, but this emotional yearning to do it. Right. I think is really beautiful, because ultimately, if we're paying attention and we're listening to our souls, they want to do good. I really do believe that. I think that deep down inside, people want to do good. There are things that stand in our way, but I think that we really do want to do good.
A question.
Yes.
Now, Aviva was very helpful in saying what seems minor to one may seem major to another. What were these commentators thinking when they described a mitzvah as minor?
It's a very confusing thing in Judaism. It's one of these things with, 3 Jews, 5 opinions. Because on the one hand, there's a section of Pirkey Avot that says there's no such thing as a small mitzvah. There's no such thing as a minor mitzvah. And you don't know which is which, right? So you have to be careful with all the commandments. On the other hand, there's definitely a concept of like the big ones, the big mitzvot. And I'm not even talking about the 10 commandments, but I'm talking about like if you were talking to somebody who was, if you were trying to determine someone who was more strictly observant versus less strictly observant, the things you'd probably look at are keeping kosher, keeping Shabbat, and maybe using the mikvah. Like those are kind of the big 3, if you will, right? Not in terms of like ethical mitzvot. I'm not talking about like stuff in the 10 commandments about how you treat each other, but like in terms of ritual mitzvot. Those are considered the big 3. But how can you have the big 3 if you don't know the difference between a minor and a major mitzvah, right? But on the other hand, we look at the punishments in the Torah, right? Like there's a bigger punishment in the Torah for murder than there is for stealing, right? Or for breaking the Sabbath than stealing, I guess, so it depends. So like there's more major stuff and more minor stuff, but I think what it's saying is we don't necessarily know. We don't know what the reward is for big or small. We don't know what is big or small, but I don't know. Does anybody have a different idea than me? I think it's one of those things that is not clear from the rabbinic commentaries.
I can only say that one of the big ones is saving a life.
For sure. They even say, Pikuach nefesh dochet Shabbat. The saving of a life comes before anything else. I think life probably trumps everything pretty much in Judaism.
Right.
So I don't know. There's another place in the Mishnah where it says that being honest, and if you're honest in business, it's as if you've kept the whole Torah. So then that's raised up a different level. Like there are different places where the Torah says this is the really important thing, which is why I think it's not clear what they are. Aviva, what do you think?
And I can certainly see where, like, you might think a minor one is going to visit someone who's sick, or sending a card, let's say, in these days, to someone who's sick, or making a phone call. And yet to them, it may be a very major mitzvah, because that's the only connection they've made for that whole day or week or whatever. So it really is in the eyes of the beholder.
You don't know the consequence of a mitzvah you're doing.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Aviva, were you going to say something?
I'm sure I decided it's the idea, you know, growing up, I always heard this story, you know, about the kid who is coming home from school one day with a really big backpack, you know, full of stuff, and he's getting picked on until one kid comes over and tells all the kids to, you know, leave the kid alone. Turns out those kids end up becoming best friends. At graduation, the kid who had been bullied told everyone the story about what was actually happening. He'd gone home had actually emptied out his whole locker that day to save his mom the trip, because he was going to commit suicide because he'd been picked on for so long he just couldn't handle anymore. And then this one kid pretty much saved his life, literally. And so the one kid who was just stopping bullying, didn't think much of it, just that's what you're supposed to do. The other kid, it literally saved his life. So, you know,
that's a good one.
In the eyes of the beholder.
Yeah. And it's just not just the eyes of the beholder, it's that you don't know the consequences. That
right.
When you're doing a good thing, you don't know, like ripples in a pond, right? You don't know what other good it's going to lead to. I think that's a really good thing for a teacher to keep in mind too. Okay, thanks, Aviva. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
All right, Sherry, you want to read this one?
Sure. Do not scorn any man, and do not discount anything. For there is no man who has not his hour, and no thing that has not its place.
So we talked about this a little bit about learning from everyone, right? But it's not just about people, right? There's a reason for everything in the world. Do you guys know the story about King David and the spider? So King David at one point is kind of looking around the world, and he sees the bee and he sees the spider, and he's like, why did God create these things? These are not good animals. Like the bees, they sting, they hurt people, and spiders, they're just disgusting animals. Like, what is the point? And that there's something with the bee, and I'm not remembering it right now, but later when King David is running away from, he's not king yet, when David is running away from King Saul, who's trying to kill him, he goes into a cave, and a spider comes along and quickly builds this huge web. And then when Saul and his soldiers are coming by, they see that cave, but they see the web and figure nobody can be inside, and so they keep going. And that spider saves King David's life, right? We don't know what the purpose of everything and every person is in heaven, but we know that everything that is here for a reason.
So just tell me about mosquitoes.
So I don't have the answer, but there must be a reason that they're here, right? Who knows? Maybe someday we're going to find some great medication that comes from mosquitoes, right?
We saw something similar to this in the past week's Torah portion, where Jacob is running away, and he comes to a forsaken place in the wilderness, probably surrounded by danger, and realizes God was in this place and I did not know it. And that really becomes our responsibility. Can we find God everywhere, even in the worst of places?
So, Mandy, you want to read to us what HaChassid says about this?
Torah and the world are like body and soul, just as there is nothing superfluous in the Torah, the soul of the world, so there is no futile matter in the world itself.
So I don't know if you've heard this before, but there's an idea that there's nothing extra in the Torah. There are no extra words, there are no extra letters. Everything that's in there is in there for a reason. So even when something's repeated, it's telling us something. So when it says, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice, you should pursue, there's a reason it says justice twice. It's not a typo. But this is also saying that there's nothing extra in the world. Those mosquitoes are here for a reason. I don't yet know why, but they're here for a reason. Everything that's in the world is here for a reason. And Karen, you want to read us what Maharal says?
Yep, and it sounds like exactly what you just said. Every person and thing plays a role in the grand scheme of creation, without which the world is incomplete.
There's in Judaism, if you have a Torah scroll and there's one missing letter or even one crack in one letter, it's not kosher to be used. You can't read from it. You have to get it repaired. Just one letter in the whole Torah. And they say that the letters in the Torah, they represent people on the earth, right? So we're missing one person, the world is not complete, right? Everybody is important. Okay. Let's see, Roger, you're up.
Eliezer, the son of Shemua, would say, the dignity of your student should be as precious to you as your own, the dignity of your colleague as your awe of your master, and your awe of your master as your awe of heaven.
All right, I got a bunch of teachers here. What do you think of that one?
The first one is just so clear. It is, yes, they're younger, they're smaller, they don't know as much, and yet you have to see, B'Tselem Elohim, you must treat every student with tremendous dignity, just as you would yourself. It's why years ago I decided never any sarcasm.
Really important. So how about the part about the dignity of your colleague should be as your awe of your master?
I think that you can learn as much from your colleague as you can from somebody who many revere as higher on the totem pole.
Terrific. Maria, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just thinking it goes back to what we talked about earlier, that you should always view everyone as someone you can learn from and not look down at people because of their inferiority or superiority of position.
I mean, I don't know about you. I've worked in places that are very hierarchical, and I've worked on places that are very cooperative and people are working together and it's not so much about hierarchy. I think so much more gets done in the non-hierarchical, situations where we take advice from everybody and we learn from everybody and it's not all coming from the top. I really believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And your awe of your master is as if you're awe of heaven, right? You're supposed to look at your teacher and also as your parent. You're supposed to have the kind of awe in them as you do of God, right? Because especially the Talmud, the Torah says that we should, the Talmud says that we should look at our parent as we look at God, because our parents created us like God created the world, right? So we need to have that respect for our parents, for our teachers, etc. Marie, you want to read us about what Rabbi Moshe Alekshar says about it?
Rabbi Alazar adds that an assembly can be successful when the participants treat their inferiors as equals and their equals as their superiors.
I think it's very powerful. I've often heard from kids that the adults they like most are the ones who talk to them like they're adults or like their equals, don't talk down to them. So I think that's amazing, right? If we don't look down at anybody, be a different world. Right, let's see if we can do one more before we finish. Let me just ask you before we do one more. We're not going to finish everything I have today. Would you want a part 3 for Pirkei Avot? All right, so I will schedule a part 3 for the stuff.
Yes.
Okay, I will do that. All right, Jen, you want to read this one?
Sure. He, Rabbi Yaakov, would also say, a single moment of repentance and good deeds in this world is greater than all of the world to come. And a single moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than our present world.
So this is a really, really interesting one. A single moment of repentance and good deeds in this world are greater than the world to come, because once we get to the world to come, whatever it is that comes after death, we can't do mitzvahs anymore. We don't have a free will anymore. We can't do mitzvahs. So all the good things that we can do on earth, we're done. At the end of our life, we're done. And so repenting, right, or doing good deeds right now is like even better than whatever's coming next, because we lose that opportunity to do those good things. But on the other hand, the bliss that we'll have in the world to come is better than everything now. So it's just a very interesting way to look at it. It's a good reminder that we shouldn't, Judaism does not spend life thinking about what's coming next, right? We're not supposed to do good now because of what's going to come after we die. This world and doing good now is the focus. Let's look at the commentary on that, and then we'll wrap up. Lisa, you want to read from the Mefarshim, which just means commentators?
Sure. This world is the arena where we can do good deeds and better our characters. Once we reach the next world, the challenges of terrestrial life no longer exist. We are no longer in a position to repent or perform good deeds. We should therefore cherish every moment of our lives, knowing that it provides us with immeasurable opportunity that will not be available to us in the next world.
So that's pretty much restating what I said. All right, I'm going to stop sharing, because this is a lot. We talked about a lot of stuff. I want to know if anything stands out, if there's anything that jumps out at you as like, wow, I want to remember this in the future. This is good advice. Anything that just jumped out at you from our conversation or from what we read?
Yeah, I took a picture of the quote I just read because I want to put that as an email postscript now in all of my wisdom quotes. I think people always need to remember that.
What specifically do you like about it?
Just always remembering to treat everybody equally, and you know, whether or not you're the director or you're the president or whoever, that you're still a person and your opinion counts and you should be valued, and everyone should share information and opinions and communicate and talk to each other. I wrote an editorial for the paper a couple of days ago that fits this so perfectly, because I'm frustrated by what I'm seeing in the news. And yeah, I just think it's something that for some reason people can never hear enough and be reminded of.
Great, thanks for sharing that. Anybody else, something that stands out for you?
Oh, so many things. I'm so glad that you're doing part 3 too. And ironically, I was talking about our last course with a preacher that I met this weekend. So it was great to show my knowledge to somebody else. So thank you for that, Sippy. But some of the notes that I wrote were, mitzvahs are to make a connection. I haven't heard that before stated that way. I really like that, because I feel like so much about just me in general is making connections. You know, a consequence of sin or transgression is losing a connection. Rambam ultimately wants us to do good. Or sorry, yeah, people ultimately want to do good.
Yeah.
Sorry, one more. You never know the full consequence of a mitzvah.
It's like teaching, right? Like teaching is planting seeds. We don't know where they're going to sprout, how they're going to sprout. There's one student I had when I was in 6th grade, and he just was a class clown. I loved him. Actually, the hardest thing for me was not laughing, because he just was such a funny kid. But I didn't think that while he was in my class, he was retaining anything. I'm friends with his mom. And so as he's like growing into adulthood, I'll hear stuff from her. And when he was in Israel for a year, he came back, and the first thing he said to his mom when he got off the plane was, I knew everything they taught me in that class because I'd learned it from Gerard Altman Shaper, which was like, you know, and like, I'll hear stuff from her like that all the time about this kid. And now this year she texted me and said, he's a college student, And he's teaching part-time at one of the day schools in Chicago, Jewish studies. And I'm like, if you had told me this, like I said, I always liked this kid, but if you had told me this when this kid was in 6th grade, I would have been like, no, I'm not planting any seeds there. There's nothing getting through. So you just don't know. All right, we're at 1 o'clock. Does anybody have any clothing thoughts they want to share? All right, I will find a date for part 3, so stay tuned for that. And thank you all for being here. This is a highlight of my day for sure.
Thank you
so much, everyone.
All right, have a great day.